done an intelligence test or an IQ test, particularly with the prospect, hopefully, of getting a new job? Many firms, or certainly human resources companies, insist that you undergo these kind of tests to categorise you, work you out as to whether or not you will fit in with certain companies. I'm not sure about I don't think I've actually ever done an IQ test, which is really lucky because I'm very bad at the obvious. You know those sequential puzzles? I can never work out what the next number is supposed to be. Apparently it's really obvious in many cases and I just don't see it, but that's a whole other story. We're told now something that maybe you've considered in the past, that these IQ tests are not always the best way to judge whether you're suited for a job. Brainwave here. The research has come out that shows that it's not always the best indicator. Now, why is that? And what can we do about it? Dr. Stefan Volk is Senior Lecturer at the University of Sydney Business School. Dr. Volk, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
These IQ tests are used pretty prolifically now, aren't they?
Yes, they are. And they have a problem. They focus only on one type of intelligence, as we argue, which by itself is okay, but we argue that there are different forms of intelligence, and employers, but also universities and schools, have to consider these differences. So what we do in our research in general is we apply neuroscience research to problems in the business world, in particular in a management context. And in this case, we have looked at neuroscience research related to intelligence to better understand how we can better conceptualize and measure intelligence in the workplace. And this research shows us that there is a specific brain system underlying the level of intelligence that we can achieve. That is the so-called working memory system. It is an information storage system that has a limited capacity and that is prone to be depleted if we are engaging in multiple cognitive demands. That means if we are doing several tasks at the same time, the classic multitasking.
So, Stefan, the current tests that are being used, what are they measuring?
So they are measuring what we call intelligence capacity. So when you look at intelligence from this working memory perspective, it becomes clear that there are two forms of intelligence. One is what we call intelligence capacity. That is what traditional tests are measuring. That is the maximum level of intelligence you can achieve in an optimal setting. And an optimal setting is you're sitting in a room, you have no other demanding tasks, you have no distractions, you can focus all your cognitive resources on the task, and you can exploit your full working memory capacity, so your full intelligence capacity in doing this task.
Which is a pretty unrealistic situation in most workplaces.
It depends on the specific task that you are performing. So if you're looking for somebody who's working in a restricted environment, such as a researcher who's working in a laboratory and can focus completely on the work, then intelligence capacity is a good measure, and you should use those traditional tests. But in most firm settings, most managerial positions involve multitasking. And multitasking requires a different form of intelligence, what we call realized intelligence. And that is the intelligence that you can actually realize in real-world settings when you have to cope with multiple demands at the same time, with multiple tasks.
With distractions.
Distractions, all kinds of distractions. You're taking phone calls, you're talking to people, so you're not completely focused on the task.
So can we actually measure that?
We can measure it. So first of all, what's important to point out here is that realized intelligence is obviously always smaller than intelligence capacity because those multiple competing demands are taking away from our capacity. Those people who perform best in terms of intelligence capacity, that is those people who perform best in traditional intelligence tests, are not typically the same people who perform best in realized intelligence. And it's why it's important that firms know what kind of intelligence they need for a specific task and then use different tests. So we all know the traditional intelligence tests that are used to measure intelligence capacity. We in our research, we propose new tests that can measure realized intelligence.
Now, when you look at this, so your first step is to work out what kind of intelligence you need. So you look at the sort of work that this person who you're looking for will do. and give it an assessment as to which type of intelligence it is. Have we been able to test for realised intelligence before and just not known it?
There are tests that were developed in neuroscience for scientific research purposes. So these tests were there. We didn't invent them. We just kind of dig them up and showed how they can be used to measure realized intelligence. So those measures were always there, but they have never been applied in organizational settings. So just to give you an example, a certain type of tests that can be used to measure realized intelligence are measures that assess to what extent our cognitive performance drops as soon as we have to engage in multiple demands. So you start from an ideal situation and then you add additional cognitive tasks and see to what extent cognitive capacity drops. So people typically perform in those tests simple cognitive tasks such as reading out something loud or writing something or doing calculations. And then we show them in between information that they have to memorize, letters, numbers, pictures, and then they have to continue with the calculation, for example. And at some point we ask them to repeat or to return this information that they have memorized. You started with a simple task. So, for example, reading out loud is less cognitively demanding than doing a calculation, and memorizing a picture is more simple than memorizing a 4-digit number. So you start with something simple, such as remember a letter while you're reading out loud, and then you add more tasks, more demands, such as calculations and 4-digit numbers, and you see to what extent the performance drops. And based on that, you can measure to what extent people are able to cope with multitasking demands.
But then that might not be the person who would be perfect for project work or the lab work that you were describing at the beginning.
So you may have a person who is a genius and who is really intelligent and has a very high intelligence capacity, but breaks down under stress. And that is not the person you need for tasks that are stressful or where you have to engage in extensive multitasking. However, he might be the perfect person for other tasks where he can be working in this protected, secure environment where he's not having to cope with these multiple demands. So you need to understand clearly what are the task requirements, what does the person need to do, and what type of person we therefore want to recruit for the specific task.
I'm talking with Dr. Stefan Volk from the University of Sydney Business School. We're talking about intelligence tests or IQ tests. They're used widely to determine who will get a job, but are they really the best measure? That's what we're asking today. And Stefan says there are different kinds of tests that can actually differentiate between those with the right kinds of intelligence for different jobs. What's been the reaction to this new approach, Stefan?
Well, this is relatively new. We have just released it, but the responses are generally positive. As you just said, most people have always thought that, yes, it's true, those people who perform best in school and university were not always the same people who perform best in the workplace. And that is part of the problem. We have focused too much on intelligence capacity. And it's not wrong. We're not saying we shouldn't focus on intelligence capacity, but we should also look at realized intelligence. And for a long time, those people who were good in terms of realized intelligence were disadvantaged because the tests that have been used to assess their performance from school, starting in school, then in university, and then later in selection processes in organizations, have disadvantaged them.
It kind of surprises me that it's taken this long to get this other test, because it was years ago that we started talking about emotional IQ as well, which presumably would be more suited to certain jobs than perhaps others.
Exactly. So emotional intelligence is another form of intelligence that is important in certain settings. So people who are just intelligent in terms of a rational intelligence cannot cope very well with people and interaction. So there is more and more research coming out of this, and we are learning more and more how to better kind of test people and how to better understand to which tasks their specific capabilities fit best. But we have failed to apply a so-called individual differences approach by acknowledging that different people are performing different tasks more or less well. We have always assumed there's one ideal kind of type of person who can do all the tasks best, and that's not the case.
Well, it sounds like a good way to think that we're not, one size does not fit all, and not all skills are important for all jobs, and this is differentiating what you need. It's been good to talk with you, Stefan. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Dr. Stefan Volk, Senior Lecturer at the University of Sydney Business School. As long as there are no sequential tests in there, I'll be very, very happy on that one.